What we're going to do now is talk about Brad Treliving, obviously the newest face of the franchise, and we're going to get into that because the Kyle Dubas era is gone. It's over. It's Brad Treliving time now, and of course he works in tandem, I guess seemingly going forward with Brendan Shanahan, at least for the next 2 years. So that's how long Shanahan has on his contract, so we'll see after that what happens. But a lot of big decisions for Treliving to make. So I just wanted to go through sort of his record, what he's about, who he is, where he came from, and what Leafs fans can expect. So I wanted to start just by saying that he was the Yotes AGM from 2007 to 2014, so he's there for quite a long time. Flames general manager, that's where most people know the name Brad Treliving from, aside from the fact that he's Jim Treliving's son. The Boston Pizza coming in for the Leafs this year. Yeah, exactly. Austin Matthews might sign for $1 million, but sign a $200 million Boston Pizza promotion.
Get $100 million worth of pizzas delivered to his store.
Yeah, exactly. So Flames GM from April 2014 until just recently when he was let go. So that's where the bulk of his moves that we're going to look at came from. So I wanted to start with the draft. His draft record generally is pretty good, but there are a few trends that I noticed just when going through some of the players that he picked, starting from 2014 up until the most recent draft in 2022. So I found that he typically drafts some bigger players who tend to play in North America, which seemingly goes against Kyle Dubas' philosophy in terms of his drafting in Toronto. He tended to pick some undersized players with high ceilings, and they didn't have to be North American-born players. A lot of them played overseas, whether it be in Sweden, Finland, Russia, you name it. So I feel like that was a bit of a trend for Kyle. So it seems like we're getting the opposite here in Brad Treliving. So just off the top, is there any one particular pick that that of Brad Treliving pick in Calgary that you thought was a steal, you thought was the perfect type of player, or that kind of sums up his drafting record in Calgary?
Yeah, I'll give you you're gonna hate me, but I'll give you a bit of a half answer.
Okay.
The first thing I'll say, general manager, you always set the direction for, you're the boss. You set the direction for every department of your team, whether it's scouting, whether it's, analytics, whether it's sports science, no matter what it is, you're tasked with setting the direction. But ultimately, you're delegating that responsibility to guys that you trust or appoint. In this case, when it comes to scouting and drafting, it's your director of scouting. So, unless you're picking first overall or very high, ultimately the general manager doesn't have that much say in terms of whose name is actually called at the table. So I want to give a lot of credit here to the scouting staff in Calgary, and particularly the head scout there, who I don't know the name of off the top of my head, but it's apparent that they've got a good support staff, and I'm sure whether it's the current scouting staff in place that's led by Wes Clark, or whether it's his own guy that he wants to bring in and make that change, they'll ultimately be tasked with leading that. So I won't give all the credit to Treliving here. That being said, you asked me for a pick that I like in particular, and I'm going to point to one that I see on the board right here, which is Andrew Mangiapane, which is a 6th round pick. At the time, if I remember correctly, was a 20-year-old overage player out of Barrie in the OHL. They take him in the 6th round. And the reason why I'm going to point to that is not just because he's developed into a good player and, is kind of a heart and soul guy, works hard, was on the radar for Team Canada when we thought they were going to the Olympics. Yeah. But also because of where he was drafted. And that's one thing that the Leafs have had a bit of an issue doing in the last number of years, is finding picks in the later rounds. They've hit on, a lot of first-round picks going back to, the unmissable guys with Marner and Matthews and Nylander and, whoever else. And have had some success recently as well with guys like Liljegren plays and Sandin before he was dealt. And even into the second round with guys like Matthew Nyes, who looks like he's going to round out to be a pretty good player. But a lot of times that value, the true value of your head scout and your scouting staff works, comes in the later rounds with guys they may be able to find down there. And you look at Tampa, who's been kind of the class of that recently, where you're able to get a guy like Braden Point in the third round. Other guys that you're able to find after the first round picks, the guys that jump off the page right away. So, to see that guys who've been picked very late in the draft, which, is rare, but it happens. But guys who've been picked late in the draft by Treliving and his staff out in Calgary have turned out to be very effective players, very good players, and guys that aren't just, working hard and earning a fourth line spot on your team or your seventh defenseman, but guys who are actual contributors. And so that's something going forward that hopefully is replicated with the Leafs here.
Right, and I do want to give some credit to the Maple Leaf scouting staff and maybe Kyle Dubas, although being a former scout, like you mentioned, maybe not so much Kyle Dubas, but the Maple Leaf scouting staff for picking some of those players in the later rounds. Like I'm thinking of a player like Topi Niemela, who is still coming up and will likely play full-time for the Marlies next year. Roni Hirvonen is another player from that same draft who I think has a pretty high ceiling, all things considered, where he was picked and whatnot. So there are a few players that seem like they have some high ceilings and are developing nicely, but I just don't think Dubas has been at the helm of the Maple Leafs for long enough to see enough players come through where we can truly evaluate it yet.
Yeah, and you may be right, but I'll say that it's certainly important, especially when you have a good team here, where you have a greater propensity to trade your high picks for value at the deadline, or whether you want to unload cap space. And speaking of cap space, which the Leafs have very little of, you need that constant push up from your development system of guys who are ready to come in, play on the cheap on their ELC, and take those spots. And so I agree, there hasn't been that longevity of guys who are 24, 25 and find their way up and were later round picks and those types of stories. But given the place where the Leafs are at, it would certainly be nice to hopefully see a bit of a diamond in the rough come up. But as I said, it's easier said than done. If you knew they were going to be a diamond in the rough, then you wouldn't wait until the sixth round to take them. You would have taken, if Calgary knew Mangiapane would be a 30 goal scorer, then they would have taken him in the first round or the second round. So it's definitely not an exact science, but point being is, maybe it's a different direction from up top, a different priority in terms of the players you want, and maybe those are the guys that will be able to make that step, even though they're later round picks.
For sure. And okay, so we're going to get into that later. We have a segment of this episode where we're going to talk about some players who are on the cusp, coming up from the Marlies or overseas, who might be able to make an impact at the NHL next year. But for now, we're just going to keep going through Brad Treliving's record. And just to sum up on his draft record, I'll read out just some notable picks that he has made, or that his scouting staff has made while he's been at the helm as general manager. 4th overall in 2014, Sam Bennett. Pretty good pick there. Obviously didn't work out in Calgary, but he's a hell of a player, having a hell of a playoff in Florida right now. Yeah,
he's come a long way from being ridiculed for not being able to do a pull-up, and now he's one of the strongest, grittiest players in the league. So
well, he hurt 2 players on the Maple Leafs in one series. There you go. That's the type of player you got there. And just rapid fire here. In 2015, Rasmus Anderson, 53rd overall. Oliver Shillington, 60th overall. And Andrew Mangiapane, like you just mentioned, in the 6th round. In 2016, a bit of a can't-miss pick with the 6th overall pick in Matthew Tkachuk, but he has established himself as maybe the second best player out of that draft behind Matthews. Like, I don't know if there's an argument for anybody else even. So that was a great pick there. In that same draft, in the 2nd round, they got Dylan Dubé, and then in the 3rd round, they got Adam Fox, which again, another player.
That guy?
Norris Trophy winner, one of the best defensemen in the NHL perennially. So he's pretty good. So clearly that was a time where they were able to recognize that talent, but obviously weren't able to sign him, ended up trading him to Carolina.
Yeah.
We'll get into that later.
Yeah.
And then Matthew Phillips as well in 2016, a player who has some pretty damn good numbers in the American League, and that could be a guy who comes up and makes an impact shortly for the Flames. So 2017, Juuso Välimäki. I remember that pick because it was one before Liljegren in 2017, and their eyes were on a few players in and around that time. Välimäki was a player who I was also interested in, the Leafs picking, and they went with Liljegren, and they're both pretty good defensemen. But again, Välimäki not in Calgary. I believe he's in Arizona and had a pretty good season. So not a bad pick there. 2018, no notable players picked, but they didn't pick until the 4th round. So again, it's like there weren't any easy picks there. Going to 2019, Jacob Pelche, 26th overall. I think that's a pretty good pick. He played a few games this season, famously under Daryl Sutter.
What number was he?
Who asked what number he wore. And Dustin Wolf as well in the 7th round in 2019, who looks like the goalie of the future as soon as next year for this team. I would imagine they'll try to get rid of Dan Vladar or do something about that situation there, because I think they want Dustin Wolf playing NHL games as soon as next season. 2020, Connor Zary, 24th overall. We're getting into the territory now where we haven't seen these players play. We don't really know. These are some guys with some high potential, as well as Poirier here as well in the 3rd round. And then in 2021, again, haven't seen these players play, but Matt Coronado looks like a good pick, 13th overall as of right now, but we'll just have to wait and see.